Jay Baba, and welcome everyone. We're grateful once again to have Charles here with us the day before Silence Day. And I'd love to hear what Charles has to share for us.
Thank you, Ruthie, and thanks once again for hosting. So good of you, and you always do such a wonderful job. I thought I would start appropriately with something from Baba himself. So I'm going to put up a photo while I read. So this is beloved Baba at the East-West Gathering, 1962. So on the first day of the darshan, where all the Easterners and Westerners were gathered together under the pandal, Baba gave a beautiful message. That was November 1st, 1962. He gave a beautiful message, had it read out, which he entitled, "My Dear Children." And part of the message, he said this: "Throughout the years, I've been giving many messages and discourses. Today, I simply want to tell you who are gathered here in my love to shut the ears of your minds and open the ears of your hearts to hear my word when I utter it. Do not seek my blessing, which is always with you, but long for the day when my grace will descend on all who love me. Most blessed are they who do not even long for my grace, but simply seek to do my will." So shut the ears of our minds, open the ears of our hearts. So that's the meaning of being with Baba in silence, not only on Silence Day, but every day. Only in the depths of that silence, Baba often said, will we hear his real voice. Now, of course, growing up early with Baba as a child, I didn't really fully know the meaning, what it meant to enter into silence with Baba. I mean, I was silent with Baba. I loved to walk around the center after Baba left and just be with Baba in silence. And honestly, I think without thinking about it, that's how I came to communicate with Baba when he was not there in the body, is just walking around, being with him, imagining him. So I guess I did have an understanding on some level of what it meant. But when Silence Day rolled around, I knew this much. It was a great relief not to have to talk, not to have to say anything. I mean, for an introvert, it's the ideal holiday, right? It's the ideal day. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to say anything. You're free. And I love that. And so I looked forward to that every year. But beyond the wonderful relief of not having to say anything, Silence Day could also be a lot of fun, especially because for some years in my early years with Baba, I got to spend the day with Kitty, Elizabeth, and Margaret. Now, I think all of you on today's call know of Kitty, Elizabeth, and Margaret quite well, but I thought I would just quickly put up a photo of them just to remind you of kind of what they looked like in those days. So that, of course, is Elizabeth Patterson. On our far left, Kitty Davy in the middle, and Margaret Krask. And it's maybe one of the greatest gifts, it certainly ranks way up there, that Baba ever gave me, was to have time with them as a child, as a young person. This is a little after those years I'm talking about, but they looked the same. They looked the same the whole time I knew them. And being with them any day of the week, much less Silence Day, was as close to like being with Baba as one could get. And of course, those of you who knew them, or knew one of them, or two of them, or some of you, all three of them, know exactly what I mean. It's just the way they acted, the way they were transparent to Baba all the time. The way they had wonderful, distinctive personalities, but Baba had ground down their ego to such an extent that their personalities were all for him, put in service of him. He didn't take away the personalities. I mean, as you know, Kitty was always Kitty, and Margaret was inimitably Margaret, and Elizabeth was always Elizabeth. But he used all of that for his work. And so they were transparent to Baba in the way that they were in themselves, in their personalities. So just to give a little taste of what that was like, part of the fun of Silence Day, besides just being silent, was seeing who was going to make a mistake. You probably do this yourselves, and you too, you know, who was going to make a mistake? What would it be this year? Because there was always something. You know, Monty used to say that they did the same thing. You know, there would always be something that would happen, and they would slip up. You know, so they were always waiting to see who would slip up and what it would be. With Kitty, you know, it was usually something to do with the dog. You know, she couldn't help herself, and I can identify with that, because being silent Silence Day is really easy, except for dogs. You know, just the habit of talking to them, and then knowing they want to hear you. You know, so Kitty, I mean, would be just, you know, silent until that nervous moment came when she would say something like, "Oh, yes, come here, beauty. No, you can't do," you know, something like that. And then she'd suddenly realize, oh, it's Silence Day. So with Kitty, it was usually the dogs, or one of the dogs. With Margaret, she did not slip up as far as I can remember, but she tried to make everybody else slip up. That's how Margaret was, you know, her humor was such. So I remember one year she walked through the living room of Del Ruba where we were sitting, and she made the camel face. Now, I don't know if she ever made this face for any of you, but and I'm certainly not going to try to imitate it, but she would make this face that looked exactly like a camel. I cannot tell you how she did it, but she did. And she'd come through the living room of Del Ruba with the camel face and walking like a camel. And the first time she did that, I think I did laugh out loud. Because it was just too funny. So that was her fun. And sometimes she would write little chits, you know, little notes with rhymes or limericks, you know, to us on Silence Day, which also would make us laugh. Elizabeth rarely made a mistake. You know, Elizabeth was pretty quiet anyway, and very person of few and selected words, you could say. So it wasn't as though it seemed to be a heavy lift for her not to be speaking, but she would just be her usual presence and self, you know. And but there was one year where she did slip up, and it happened because it was that period where the phones were ringing all the time, or the phone was ringing all the time, and in those days, Elizabeth and Kitty, this was early on, still felt like they had to do everything. And Elizabeth felt particularly attached to being sure she answered the phone. It's as though whoever was on the phone, she had to immediately respond. It didn't matter what else was going on. She could be visiting with someone, and she would answer that phone. It drove my mother crazy. She'd say, Elizabeth, you don't have to always answer it. Now, we didn't have a answering machine or anything like that. So you either answered it or it rang and rang, and she just couldn't handle that. So she would pick it up. It got so bad for a time until mother really put her foot down and put a stop to it. Elizabeth had the phone on the dinner table. Can you imagine? Right next to her plate. So there we would, having a lovely dinner, or lunch or whatever, and the phone would ring and everything would stop so Elizabeth could speak to whoever it was that interrupted our lives, right? On the phone. So you have to get that background to understand what happened on one silence day. So one silence day, of course, the phone could ring, and we all knew that we didn't have to answer it, which was wonderful. And of course, most people who rang, knew it was silence day, but not everyone. So sometime during the day, this phone started ringing. And before it even got to the second ring, Elizabeth, I think out of reflex, just reached over, picked up the phone, and looked at it in horror and said, "Oh, I can't speak now. We're observing silence." And hung up. and then I think she realized that she had broken her silence. And we laughed the next day so much about that. So anyway, that's Silence Day in my memory. Such a wonderful day. But of course, our silence, even the close disciples like these three women, was awkward, compared to Baba's silence. I mean, and sometimes humorous, and trying to write little notes and so forth. So it was our silence. It was not Baba's silence. Baba's silence, as you know, was this eloquent silence. I mean, it was just beautiful silence, and never awkward. Never, sort of like ours, where, you kind of had to try to communicate. He communicated even when he wasn't gesturing, he was communicating, and it was effortless and so beautiful. And I've never seen anyone silent quite like that. I mean, that was unique. I wasn't going to tell this story, but Christopher encouraged me to do, so I might tell it anyway, even though it's a little bit out of, what I want to talk about. But it's an example of how in the ashram, silence was Baba's silence, which was enveloped the whole atmosphere, right? I mean, you imagine they sat with him in silence a lot. And no one ever felt awkward. No one ever felt somebody should say something, like human silence or ordinary human silence. Baba was very human. But Baba one year, I guess it was 1947 or something like that. No, excuse me, 1937. One year in the ashram, Baba put 4 of the Western women on silence. You probably read about this. Nadine was one of them, I forget who, but Irene Billow was another. And Mani writes about this in that wonderful book that Heather did. And Irene Billow, Mani said that in her own tactful way, well, she could understand that. It made sense because she rather liked to talk. Well, I knew Irene Billow, and I can confirm that she loved to talk. I mean, she was one of these folks who could just talk and talk and talk and talk. And she didn't even mind whether you half caught everything she said. She would just talk I visited her in Switzerland, and I don't think she stopped talking the whole time I was there. I can't remember a silent moment the whole time I was there. She was very sweet, very loving. She was so devoted to Baba, and she was a favorite in the ashram. They all liked her very much, and but she did like to talk. So when Baba put her on silence for a year, there were people who felt, oh, okay, great. We'll have a little break, and but Mani says it was actually worse because Irene still wanted to talk. So of course she did, but now it was through all these gestures and so forth, and you had to try to figure out what it was she was saying. And as Mani says, if people talk a lot, you don't have to necessarily pay attention to every word, or it can be background, but if they're gesturing, there you are. You have to try to, understand what they're saying and so forth. So it's a lot more work. When Irene was on silence, it was a lot more work. And so Mani said that one day, and Mani, being Mani, learned her gestures, which made it worse for Mani, because then Mani would have to interpret. How Mani was. I mean, she was just so so extraordinary, but how loving and sweet and compassionate she was to learn her gestures, right? I mean, so so that she could help her communicate. So anyway, so Irene, one day Mani was walked in the room, and there was Irene over another side of the room with Mara, gesturing and gesturing and gesturing. And Mara was, trying to follow along, and Irene was trying to express something, and I'm sure it was very difficult for Mara to understand what she was saying. So Mani came over. Mara calls Mani over. Oh, Mani, come here. And Mani actually, I should say, tried to kind of sneak out when she saw this scene to get away, but too late. Mara saw her, and Mara said, oh, Mani, come over. Irene's just telling me something very interesting. You'll want to hear this. So Mani comes over, and of course, Irene was very happy because now there's someone who really can get all the gestures. And so she continued to, and it happened to be, she was telling Mara her whole family tree, right? Telling her about Aunt so-and-so, and then there was Uncle this, and so Uncle Ferdinand, or whoever it was. And she was telling her the whole family tree, if you can imagine. And Mara, so Mani, of course, then had to concentrate on these gestures and interpret what she was saying and who was this and who was that. And meanwhile, Mara just simply tiptoed away, leaving Mani there with Irene. And so at the end of it, finally, after all of it, Irene, looked at Mani and said, oh, Mani, you have to tell Mara everything that I've told you. You have to go and tell her. And Mani thought to herself, you have no idea what I'm going to tell Mara. And so she went back into the room that they shared, Mara and Mani, they always shared a room. And there was Mara lying on her bed, propped up, reading a book, looking very relaxed. And Mani came over and was about to say something. And then Mara looked at her and started to laugh. And then Mani looked at her and started to laugh. And they got such a wonderful laugh. Anyway, it is such a great story for Silence Day, unbelievable. Another little vignette I'll mention about Mandali people and silence is, of course, you have to bring in Gustaji if you're going to talk about being silent with Baba, around Baba, because Gustaji, as I'm sure all of you know, was silent by Baba's order for the last 25 years of his life. You know, sometimes Gustaji is referred to as Baba's shadow, right? So he was sent to Baba by Upasni Maharaj, as I'm sure you know, and then and Upasni told him to obey Baba. So he was very, very close to Baba. He was like a very, very dear companion all those years, and Baba enjoyed him so much. But Baba wanted him, and he was a talker. he, he was a big talker. Anyway, so Baba put him on silence. Of course, that didn't slow him down any more than it did Irene. So Gustaji continued to communicate. In fact, Erich says that he was so good at it that he was the best storyteller of all. Erich said, you think you tell me that I'm a good storyteller and all that. He said, it's just blah, blah, blah compared to Gustaji. He was the best storyteller in silence. Of course, Baba was a great storyteller in silence. I've always really tried to imagine how Baba told these detailed stories in silence, but he did. And so Gustaji. But the reason that Baba enjoyed it so much is because Gustaji would act it out. He had all these expressions. He would be humorous. He would be excited, you know, and Baba just loved it. Erich says, you have no idea how great it was when he would tell a story. So that's the picture, see. So he was in silence. And of course, he didn't do anything for a long time, right? I mean, Baba ordered that he had no job for a good period, you know, nothing. All these other Mandali people were working their yourselves to the bone, you know, and just overwhelmed and tired and 14-hour days and, you know, whatever. And then there would be Gustaji who didn't, and I think Erich once said, you know, it was harder for him because he had to be there and not have something to do. And Baba, it was a big test for him. So anyway, Gustaji would, and there's so many Gustaji stories. Sometime we should have just a Gustaji time, right? Because what an incredible figure. Anyway, Gustaji would communicate, of course, in his silence, and he would use his own gestures that he invented, not Baba's gestures, his own language. And of course, if you're silent for 25 years, you know, I mean, now Nadine Tolstoy, in her year of silence, she got the bright idea to use an alphabet board. So she didn't have to invent gestures. And it was one of Baba's old alphabet boards that she had taped together. Mani says Baba probably used it to crack somebody's skull or to throw it across the room because it was broken. So she taped it together, and that's how she communicated. But Gustaji decided he was going to have, like Irene, I guess, he was going to have his own language. And so he had all these gestures that he made up. And Erich, and again, this is so typical of Erich. Erich said it fell to him to learn, and not because he was told to, I don't think. It's just he felt like it was his duty to learn the gestures. So he could interpret for people that didn't understand all that Gustaji was saying. And so, that helped also with the storytelling. Because Erich says when Gustaji would get up and start telling a story, and Erich then would be the one to, of course, speak it out. And Erich said that then he would embellish, and Gustaji would love that, and Baba would love that. So it kind of became a joint act, if you will. So Gustaji would be telling a story and Erich interpreting, and you can imagine Erich taking something that Gustav is saying and then making something more of it and embellishing it and all. It must have been so much fun to be in that room. Anyway, so Gustav could be annoying in his silence, right? I mean, he could be demanding because, he didn't have a job. So everybody else thought, well, gee, if he has all this time and stuff, why is he asking us to do this? But Gustav would, could be demanding. And so one day they were on a trip, I guess a must trip or something like that. And as usual, Baba was rush. And I think they were having to pack quickly to go to another hotel because Baba was unhappy and he couldn't sleep in this hotel. I don't know what it was, something like that. And so, as usual, it was all urgent and quick, and you had to do it right now. So Erich, doing the duty, right, that he would do, no matter what the circumstance, he just did it 1,000%, right? And so he's there packing Baba's things frantically because Baba's waiting, and Baba's, hurry up, we're going now. I don't want to be here. Let's go. So Erich is putting it together, and Gustav, his shoelace somehow gets kicked under a chair or something. His shoelace. And he starts gesturing it at Erich. And Erich is just doing Baba's things, and he doesn't want to stop and try to read these gestures for somebody who has a shoelace under a chair, and so he just keeps going. But Gustav won't give up. He's gesturing frantically, and so finally Erich looks at him and says to Gustav, "It's bad enough that I have to care for one dumb person, but I can't cope with two." Erich says, "I was completely exasperated, and I just blurted this out. What I didn't know, that Baba was standing right behind me." And the next thing I know, Erich says, Baba had grabbed my ear and twisted it and said, "Who are you calling dumb? I am not dumb. I am silent." Oh my God. Anyway, that's such a wonderful moment with Gustav. I can't even, every time I think of it, I start to laugh. So of course, unlike the silence of Gustav or Irene or Nadine or any of them, or us on Silence Day, Baba's silence was not, as you obviously know, an ordinary silence. And it was not an aesthetic practice. It was not a spiritual discipline. It was his universal work to be silent. But that didn't stop, I'm sure you've read this too, Baba's mother, Sharon, from complaining about it. She didn't like her son, her favorite son, her beautiful son, who spoke so eloquently and beautifully, and he loved to talk too, Baba. He loved to tell stories, he loved to talk, and of course he loved to sing, and he sang so beautifully that people were just mesmerized when he sang. So naturally, his mother was not happy when he entered silence, and all of that was taken away. She didn't understand it. And she complained about it, especially when it kept going on. She thought, okay, maybe it'd be a week or two or whatever, but then it went on and on and on. And so one day in those early years, she went to her son. She went to Merwan and said, why is it that you have to keep silent? Why is it? Why is it you have to fast and ruin your health? Why is that? You have all these young ones around. Look at them all. Why don't you let them keep silent or let them fast? You say you are, this and that. Well, then why should you do it? Let them do it. And Baba heard her out, because this was in character for his mother, and he said, Mother, and I'm paraphrasing what I remember being told, but I think this is close. Mother, if all of these young ones here, all these people here, were to keep silent today and for the rest of their lives, it would not equal one day of my silence. He said, this is why I have come. Now, what do we know? Giving a talk about Baba's silence is like me talking about what I know nothing about. So I don't have any wisdom on it, but I do know this, that the oral silence, this is Baba made clear this is not my idea. The oral silence is just a distant shadow at best of the real silence, right? So it wasn't that the oral silence was changing the world, obviously, but that was apparently necessary. Maybe it was the gross world expression of the real silence. I don't know. I don't have the cosmology to the understanding to say, but anyway, the power and meaning of the real silence is beyond my comprehension. I mean, I think beyond anyone's comprehension, really, including the Manli people. They had no idea. But we do know that when he was in the physical form, his silence spoke directly to each person in his contact. I mean, he spoke from silence in many different ways, not just through alphabet board or gestures, but in many ways. And now in this period of Baba's manifestation or availability, however you want to call it, his silence speaks to each and every person that he draws into his orbit. This is how he speaks now. So we do know that much, that this is silence that's so great and so profound that it speaks. It speaks when he allows it to be so, when he gives the grace for it to be so. When I met Baba in 1958, I mean, I've said this to you all before, but it bears repeating. I didn't really think that he was silent. I mean, when I first met him, I mean, I'm sure on a certain level, I mean, you couldn't, that I knew he wasn't making noise, but I didn't think of him as being silent. It never occurred to me to think Baba is silent. That was from the first moment. At least that's my experience of the silence, was it wasn't silent at all. And I had to think later that Baba wasn't silent. I had to sort of remind myself, because it was the way he communicated was so natural, at least in my experience, was so natural. You couldn't imagine him communicating any other way. You just couldn't. I mean, it was so Baba, right? I mean, this is how he communicated. And it was immediate. In fact, of course, it was more immediate than if he had used words. I only thought about that later, but words create barriers. And sometimes when you remove words, there's this immediacy between people. So, ratchet that up many times, and that's how it was with Baba. It was very immediate, expressive, of course, very expressive, always, humorous, constantly humorous. I mean, if there's any mark of Baba in this Advent, it was the constant humor. I mean, when I say constant, almost all the time. There was some occasion, Baba found some way to bring in humor, or to be humorous, or to find humor, to tease someone, to make a joke, to have someone tell a joke, to, whatever. Baba's humor was, and his face expressed the humor, right? And he, and sometimes, when he laughed, it would look like he was going to break his silence. I mean, when the men put on the program in the 1958 Sahavas in the barn, the Alligator Club, Baba laughed so hard. And later Baba said, yes, next day he said, Baba said, I laughed so hard that I almost broke my silence. It was pretty funny. I mean, it must have been hard not to laugh out loud, and, but, Baba managed, as a human being, he managed to be silent. In other words, not as God. Erich would remind us always that Baba he wasn't pretending to be human. So it was hard for him to be orally silent as a human being. But I guess what I'm trying to convey is what you already all know, because you've known Baba so well for so long, so many of you. So the silence was just the way he was supposed to be. I mean, it was no add-on or strange characteristic. It may be to others who look in and see Baba or read about him, think, oh my God, he was silent for 44 years. What does that mean? How strange is that? But it wasn't strange. There was nothing strange about Baba's silence, nothing strange. And again, it was like, in his silence, there was just nothing in between the person and Baba. And Baba was not embarrassed about sitting and looking at you in silence. Most of the time when that happens to us in a situation, it's awkward and we want to fill the silence, but not with Baba. And you would think that a child would particularly feel awkward, because of the silence, but I never felt it. I don't know about anybody else, so I can't speak for other children, but, to me, it didn't occur to me. In fact, it was wonderful that no words were needed. I was a child. I didn't have questions and, things I wanted to talk about and so forth. So I was kind of lucky that way. But I never felt it was awkward or strange. Baba's silence was intimate and familiar, just as it is now. That's how I communicated with Baba. It's how I still communicate with Baba. There's no need for words with Baba. When he was in the body, it could be a glance, a little touch, a smile, or just his mere presence. That's what spoke directly to my heart. He communicated all the time. I never thought after the darshan, oh, I wish that I'd been able to talk to Baba, because I always felt I was talking to Baba. And the good news is that it was me and Baba, just as it is me and Baba today. I can talk to Baba with nobody telling me what it's all about or what he's saying or what I'm saying to him. And I think one of the great things about Baba keeping silence is that we can live in him now in silence and communicate with him directly with our own Baba, right? The Baba that we have in our hearts, and nobody can tell you what that means or what he's saying to you, or whatever. It's not mitigated by anyone else. So Baba spoke through silence in his lifetime, and he speaks through silence today to each heart he awakens to hear his voice. As Baba once said, if my silence cannot be heard, of what avail would be speeches made by the tongue? So just to say something about the question that nobody here is probably asking or thinks about much. I wouldn't think, but that people do ask. And if this is our experience of the beloved as lovers of the beloved, and I think I'm close to sharing what many Baba lovers experience, and maybe it's different for each one, of course, but we live in his silence. Then what should we as his lovers make of his many promises to break his silence, to give the one word, right? Well, first, let me confess that growing up with Baba, I didn't think at all about the breaking of his silence. It didn't, well, except in this sense, I would pray, literally pray to Baba, don't break your silence. That's the only time I thought about it. And you probably thinking, what's wrong with you? Why would that be your prayer to Baba? Don't break your silence. Because in my mind at that time, the image that Baba kept giving was when he broke his silence, the world would know of him, and I pictured thousands, millions of people, Baba, 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 and so forth and so on. I don't know. I had this image. Why did I have this image? Because that's what he said. And, and to me, that was a very, scary scenario because, selfishly, I thought, well, once he breaks his silence, it's all over. I won't be able to be near him anymore when he's around physically. I won't be able to be close, or even correspond or whatever, because all these people, and so at best I'd be back somewhere in the back of the crowd. So that was my sort of childhood anxiety about the breaking of the silence. Otherwise, I didn't think about it. No, I don't think I was alone in this. I haven't asked others who were around at that time, and they're all gone now, so I can't ask them. I should have asked them while they were around, but I didn't. Anyway, as far as I can tell, those close to Baba gave little or no thought to the breaking of the silence. I mean, Elizabeth, Kitty, Margaret, in all those years, I never heard them say anything about it, ask anything about it, speculate about it, wonder about it. If anything, the topic could be a little bit of an embarrassment. At least that's how Erich once put it. And so I'm going to tell you what he said, because it's very revealing of how they saw it, the Mondley people. He said, you see, that's how we were in those days. Maybe we didn't have enough faith, but we used to worry about how Baba would look in the eyes of others. Now I can see how absurd this was, but then we were very protective. For example, take Baba's silence. For ourselves, we didn't care whether Baba broke his silence or not. We didn't care if Baba promised to break it every day for a year and never did. But we didn't like it when Baba promised to break his silence in public, when circulars were issued with a certain date given, because we used to think, but what will others say? What will they think when Baba doesn't break his silence on that date? Well, yeah. In my experience, no one around Baba, no one even at the darshan programs, as far as I could tell, raised any question about breaking of the silence, right? There was only one person, actually, who kept bringing the subject up. One person who just wouldn't let it go, who would bring it up out of nowhere, right? Just one person. And that one person was Baba himself. He would bring it up. Apropos of nothing, he would bring it up. I remember one morning with the Westerners at the East-West Gathering, Baba brought it up. Fine. Baba said, that he's going to break his silence soon. He's preparing to break his silence. He wants to break his silence. And, fine. I don't know what others were thinking. I was thinking, oh, yeah, well, all right. I was a little nervous because of I was 13 then, but I still had that anxiety of what that would mean for me. I was actually at that moment sitting right next to his leg, his knee. And I didn't want to give that up, So I think, I wasn't really into the whole idea of that, oh, yes, it's urgent. He's going to break his silence. The world is going to feel and all this stuff. I know that's selfish, but there you are. That was how I'm just telling you the truth. But then Baba said, after we all I think nobody said anything, everybody looked kind of, I'm not going to project on what they looked like. I was abashed, I didn't know what to say or think. But then Baba said, I want you to want the breaking of my silence because I want the breaking of my silence. And so, so then I tried. Okay, Baba. And actually, I was very touched to rewatch, as I have a number of times recently, and I'm sure you have too, the extraordinary Van Gustrom film from 1967. For me, is there anything more beautiful than that film? I'm overwhelmed watching that film. The power, of him at the end, the divinity, for me. Anyway, but at one point in the film, he brings it up. It wasn't like, it was, I think he was asked, if I get the context right, I think he was asked something like, what is your, final message or whatever, some question like that, open-ended question. And what did Baba bring up? That he's going to break his silence soon, that he's definitely going to break his silence soon. And then he says, I've said this before and I'm paraphrasing, but and he said, I'll tell you why. He said, there was a doctor who, would tell his patients who were ill, yeah, you're going to be better in 2 weeks. Right? And the doctor knew that it was not going to be 2 weeks. It was going to be months. But, he told the patient 2 weeks, the patient would feel hopeful and all that. Baba says, that's how I am. I'm not like that doctor. But he says, but now I'm telling you, I will break my silence soon. And then with a very slight smile, if you look carefully, Baba gestures, the patients are getting impatient. So it's a really wonderful line. The patients are getting impatient. No, Baba. No one ever liked Baba. No one ever liked Baba. So after Baba left the body, he dropped his body, it was only a natural thing that people would ask, and the world would ask, or whoever knew of it or whatever, and followed along, or would hear of him and see all these messages about Baba's word and the breaking of the silence. They would ask, well, did Meher Baba speak? What is this? He was saying he's going to speak. Did he speak? Or when do you think he will speak if he didn't speak? When is he going to speak? Well, I really didn't have any good answer for that myself. I'm sure people did have answers for it. I just had no good answer for that because it was not something I thought about much, and I didn't know what to say, or frankly, I didn't really care much about it. So I just didn't know. So in 1969 Darshan one day, I had the opportunity to sit with Francis Bravazan alone somehow, and on the veranda of Guru Prasad or something like that. I don't know how that happened. I think he said that he wanted to sit with me. He was very sweet about way, wanting, I guess, to make me feel like he was paying attention or whatever. And didn't really know Francis that well, or hadn't had that much contact, but he knew of me and all that. So he sat me down and all that. So we talked a little bit about different things. And I thought, well, maybe I'll just ask Francis. After all, he was around Baba, living with Baba last 10 years and Maharazad, and so maybe he has a good answer. And I said, people ask about Baba breaking his silence and so forth. And so do you think Baba broke his silence? And typical Francis, you know what he said? He said, well, if he did, I didn't hear it. And I thought, okay, that's a pretty good answer. Even if Baba did speak, or even if Baba still will speak, what would that mean to his lovers? After all, the breaking of his silence has to do with the transformation of consciousness, he tells us, in this era, just as his manifestation transformed consciousness so many times before. He releases divine love. Humanity benefits for a time, or really all life benefits for a time. A new humanity arrives of some sort, but then it eventually leaves. We fall back into the same thing. And he must come and do it all over again, and again, and again. So no matter how radical the upheaval in the world during his advent, the avatar's advent, and Meher Baba's advent features the most rapid, wide-reaching transformations in consciousness in recorded history. I mean, that's just a fact. Everything will go back to where it started, at least in terms of our ignorance, and the cycle will begin all over again. So consciousness changes. Yeah, the world changes, and then it changes back again. A new humanity comes, then becomes an old humanity. The avatar comes, then he goes, then he comes again. So what is all this to the lover of the beloved? After all, as Hafiz has said, or Baba quoted Hafiz as saying, the universe and its affairs are nothing into nothing. The lover only wants the company of the beloved. To dwell with him in the silence of perfect surrender. To accompany him when he takes human form. To serve him and him alone. All the while, the lover longs for one thing only, a longing given to him by or her by grace. The lover longs for one thing only, seeks one thing only, asks for one thing only. Beloved, beloved, speak your word of love in my heart, that I may live and dwell in you forever. Throughout the years, Baba says to us, I have been giving many messages, and discourses. Today, I simply want to tell you who are gathered here in my love, to shut the ears of your minds and open the ears of your hearts to hear my word when I utter it. Do not seek my blessing, which is always with you, but long for the day when my grace will descend on all who love me. And most blessed are they who do not even long for my grace, but simply seek to do my will. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba, Charles. Thank you.
Thank you, Baba.
Thank you, Baba. Well, if anyone has anything they'd like to say to Charles or ask, it's okay.
Yes.
Oh, tell me again the name of that film you were talking about. It's on YouTube.
You know, Louis Van Gustrum made a
And
film in 1967, and this is that film.
67. Yeah, thank you.
It's Ruthie, it's called Beyond Words.
Oh, yes. Okay, thank you. Yeah, okay. Beautiful. Oh, Daryl and Susan. Jai Baba. Go ahead.
And I had to unmute. Well, thank you. Lovely, as usual, Charles, and everyone to be here with you before Silence Day. I just have this sense in our Baba community, or just wondering why, when we gather together, we don't have more opportunities just to be silent, as in the tradition. What is that religion? Quaker tradition, where they sit in silence, and then when people are moved to speak, they say something. And that may be a little woo-woo for our community, I don't know. But but I long for that silence together. And we do have a meeting that we host on Sundays once a month, in which we do, even though it's through Zoom, because people are all over still, have about 22 minutes of silence together, and then reflect on things that have come to them. But I guess I personally just long for more of that in our community. And I wondered if you had a comment about that or anything.
Well, yeah, I think that's a lovely thought, and I'm reminded of what Baba said to Dr. Donkin when he said, you know, Baba, all this work you're doing with the muss is so important and so extraordinary. You know, it should all be written down. It should be recorded. Baba said, yeah, that's right. It's a good idea. You do it. So, yeah, it's a good idea. Do it. No, I'm saying Baba Zoom would be, for example, a great venue, and I'm sure that Angela would be delighted to have, you know, sessions where people could come on and be mostly in silence. And I love the idea that you do in your meeting, where, you know, you do have a prolonged silence and then people speak out of that. That's a lovely idea. You know, when I was organizing meetings, you know, years ago, we always had a moment of silence, but not much more. And
Yeah.
so it's lovely. Yeah, the more silence. I mean, I think especially if to me, if it begins with something from Baba, you know, and then people then reflect on that in silence or reflect in any way they want to, and then share. I mean, I think that gives it a shape. Unlike the Quakers, I think we're very blessed to have that, you know, to have that fresh dispensation of, you know, Baba's words conveying so much. And so that gives the silence a power. You know, his words carry such power. And so that's, you know, that's the thing that we, and I think meetings on Zoom to that effect, people would really love that, I think.
Sure, I'll host. I'm in.
Well, we do start with Baba's words in this meeting, and there's a difference between that and meditating together. And I think on Zoom there is some meditating groups that do some meditating or something together. I don't know, but it's just I don't know. It's just so powerful to sit with other Baba lovers and reflect on his words or reflect on our being together in his love and feel that him speaking to us. It's different than me by myself, you know.
Yeah,
Anyway,
absolutely. Yeah, wonderful.
anyway, thank you. Really enjoyed laughing with you today.
Maybe you could put your link in so other people could join your group. I love listening to your CD, Daryl, all the time. I listen to it. I saw you playing in the meeting place or somewhere, and you said, I said, how can I get your music? So I went and bought the CD, and I know a lot of your songs by heart. It's beautiful music. And thank you, Charles. This was wonderful. This is the greatest silence day ever, I think. This seems to be very monumental, doesn't it? It's like, wow, yeah. Whew. Like I actually look forward to silence day. It used to be where I was worried because I have a dog, you know, and I'd be breaking my silence also by talking to the dog. So that's that difficult part, but it's okay.
I think there's a special dispensation for speaking to a dog on Silence Day. I think Baba would enjoy that, actually.
And cats too.
And the cats, yes.
I was waiting. for this.
Yeah, cats are okay. They're not dogs, but they're okay. Just kidding. We always had cats and dogs growing up. So, and Baba also had cats and dogs. So,
Wasn't there, I was trying to think, who was Mary? I'm trying to think, didn't Kitty have a cat? Was there?
oh, that was Wendy's cat that, like all our animals, migrated over to Del Ruba. You know, when we would go away or whatever, or leave for college, you know, so they all end up, that was like, what was her name? Merry Christmas or something. I think we got her at Christmas, or Wendy got her. So it was Wendy's cat. Wendy had a cat earlier than that called Puff. I had Buff, and then she got the cat Puff. So Buff and Puff. And believe it or not, well, of course you're going to believe it, because you know Baba. There was, I don't think it was any message from Baba or from Mani or from India during those early years where Baba didn't send love to Buff and Puff. They never got left out. Yeah, Puff lived to be pretty old. I don't remember how old she did. And then, of course, Elizabeth got all these other cats. I don't know. Somehow they proliferated and people would bring cats. I'm not sure how. At one point, I think there were maybe as many as 9 in Del Ruba, you know. A lot of cats. I've forgotten what the number was at the maximum. And Elizabeth just loved them. You know, she'd go back there and in the utility room and feed them. And yeah, she loved the cats. She did have a special place in her heart for dogs. I have to say that. You know, I have to tell you, Harry Hartshorn, I may have put this in my book about Elizabeth, so excuse me for repeating myself, but Harry Hartshorn, her nephew, who she's very fond of, but he was a bit persnickety about things, and he spoke up to her in a way that nobody else dared do, right? And he called her Aunt Boo. You know, he was the only other person who called her that. I called her Auntie Boo at her request when we were children, but he called her Aunt Boo throughout his life, you know, even as an older man. And so one day I happened to be there with Auntie Boo sitting in the living room, and Harry came in, and Harry sat down. He said, you know, Aunt Boo, these cats have just gotten out of hand. You realize how many there are? And she said, yes, Harry, I know. Yes, well, there are a lot of cats. And, you know, and you and this is, no, he put it on Kitty. He said, and this is just a lot for Kitty. You know, Kitty is getting older. Of course, at that time, she was quite young, somewhere in her late 80s. For Kitty, that was young. Whatever it was not old for Kitty, because her energy level was 3 times everybody else. But he said, you know, it's just getting too much for Kitty. She can't do that all the time. It's just not right, you know, feeding and da da da. He went on, and she let him go. I mean, nobody spoke to her like that. No, I wouldn't. No, nobody. Maybe my mother did in private, but nobody else did. Anyway, he just let her have it about the cats, and so that she had to get rid of them. And so she heard him out and finished. He finally, you know, got it all out. That was her modus operandi, you know, by the way, is to let people get it all out. You know what I mean? It's just you know, it didn't matter how long it took, because then they would be quiet, right? And she didn't interrupt or correct as they went along. It was a very good strategy, actually. So he got it all out, and she sat still. She was silent for a few minutes. And I wondered, what is Auntie Boo going to say to that? And then she said, well, you know, Harry, first of all, I feed my cats. Kitty doesn't do that. I do it. And she said, and secondly, you have to understand that my animals have helped to make me who I am. And I have helped to make them who they are. So you see, she said with a smile, how could I possibly get rid of them? Now that's vintage Elizabeth right there. Yeah.
Just amazing. Thank you. Thank you, Charles. I have a few cats. That's why I'm grateful. Well, does anybody have a question? I see a few people around that might have something they might want to speak up,
They don't have to.
but I'm just looking.
We can go in silence. Roger, you have to unmute. Push the little button.
I'm trying.
There you go.
Is it working?
You get
It
it.
occurs to me that there is a difference between cats and dogs and their silence. Cats are professional silence. And dogs are like Gustagi. They're
Yeah.
talkers who are silent. So speaking to them on Silence Day is just like Erich getting trapped.
Yeah, that's right. That's a good point. I don't know. We've never had silent dogs ourselves. Any little excuse and they'll make a noise. So we have very talkative
And
dogs
they're talking to you all the
all the
time.
time. They do. Well, cat people will tell you cats can talk to you too without making a noise. Just the way they look at you and all that. Now, I'm not standing up for cats but I'm just saying they have their own language. You got to learn their language. That's the
But they're
problem.
like Mormons or no, what was it? Who is it? Who's the ones who have the silent meeting? And
Quakers, yes.
that's it. Their cats are Quakers.
Okay. It's good to see you, Roger.
Yeah, nice to see
So
you.
long. Thank you. Judy.
Oh, Charles, I just want to thank you so much for sharing Baba and his silence and the cats and dogs and bringing the humor of I'll speak for myself, my very poor but very diligent efforts to remain silent. And I am a dyed-in-the-wool cat lover, not a I agree. I have love and appreciation of dogs, but anyway, I'm a cat person. And I have, I don't know how many years of silence I have broken it only in speaking to my cat. Anyway, it's, yeah, so I'm in that category, but this has been a wonderful, preparation for getting ready to manage to be pretty much silent for one day. And the Lord himself, what he did, I mean, we're just not even, I speak for myself again, not a shadow of a shadow of a shadow of what Baba was doing. But even that, even our little efforts one day a year, bring him so much closer to my heart, and I'm sure to others. Anyway, thank you for your sharing is always so rich with Baba's presence.
Well, that's due to him, if that's true. Thank you. I have to say, one of the most beautiful films, I think, of Baba, and I haven't seen it in a long time, so I don't know, maybe one has to request these things at the center, but you all may remember the film Baba with his cat. The name of the cat, not Pilo,
Pegu.
Pegu. So do you remember that film? That is one of the most beautiful films. With that cat would come to Baba's feet and rub his feet. And, it just speaks so much about Baba's effect on animals. I mean, they all loved him so much and gravitated to him. We think of how the musks, I do, are testimony to something that we didn't see or couldn't grasp. They saw much more. They saw when they looked at him than we ever could. I think animals are another example of that. They experienced him in a way directly that, is unique. And so anyway, that film and other films with Baba, with the dogs, but there is a wonderful picture. I don't have it available to show you this in a second, but that I found on David Finster's wonderful site of Baba wrestling with a dog. Oh my God. And Baba pinning down and wrestling with this dog. It's a beautiful image of Baba, and you can see how much joy Baba is getting from playing with this dog. And yeah, and he had so many wonderful animal companions, and the dogs, you know, my God, they played a very important role. In fact, one dog, it's called an M. It's not Maston, who was later. It was in the late 40s, I think. So it'll come to me. Sorry, unless I think of these things ahead of time, the details have hard to get. Anyway, so this dog, Majab, something, I forgot, was with Baba a short time, and then he died. He got sick and he died. And Elizabeth was deeply upset because, of course, she was attached to all the animals and she was in charge of animals when she was around Baba. And I think this happened during her visit in Meherazad in 1947, 48, in that period. I think that's when I'm talking about. The point is, the dog died suddenly, and Elizabeth was very distraught. And Baba called her and said, you know, Elizabeth, this was not an ordinary dog. This dog was an agent and came just to do this work. And the work was finished. So don't mourn. This dog was something very high spiritually. I never heard Baba say anything like that before. And I'm paraphrasing a bit. Extraordinary that there was a dog that played that role in his work. Yeah, anyway.
I think the name was Warrior, Charles.
Yes,
Warrior. Who
yes.
said that? Who said that? Who
It
told
was-
me? Was that you, Candy?
Well,
Huh?
I was about to say it, but
Warrior.
someone else said it.
Meher
Meher
Meher Prasad said it.
Prasad. Thank you. Yes,
And-
warrior. Yes, exactly.
I-
Yes, Candy.
I just wanted to say something that I thought was so wonderful that Baba said about dogs. And when he said it, everyone I tell goes, yes. The atmosphere. Joel, anybody read that?
Andy, can you please repeat it? Because you cut out for me for just a second.
Okay, Baba said dogs purify the atmosphere.
Well,
And
Bob
isn't that
obviously,
true?
yeah, Bob obviously hasn't been in our house because no, I love this dog smell, but not everybody does. But yes, I get it. On a much more important level, they do. They do. They clear the air. They do. There's no question. They make joy in one's life, as do cats, of course. Yes, somebody on iPad wants to speak. I'm not sure who that is. Who's that?
Hi, it's Rosalie.
Oh, hi,
Hi,
Rosalie.
Hey, Baba.
Hey, Baba.
I just can't help thinking that at least a couple of words might be said about silence in Baba speaking to Naringa Machabeli in the mystical language, and saying how important it was to have it read with reverence. It did not need to be understood. I just think that's such a great grace. You don't have to get your mind to try to understand it. And, we have had a group with Scott McCaig and benefited tremendously. And I love it because there's not the discussion. You know, I mean, I've gone to discourse meetings and I get confused with the discussion, but it's like it's been just beneficial on an individual, but in a group way, because you're all there together and supporting that it is Baba's words, you know. And Baba said it will be important for the future. And he told Kitty, Scott McKay heard this from Kitty, not to change one word. This is for the future. You are children, to the Mandali, you are children. This is for the future. So I feel, you know, this is the future. And he never said the manifestation was going to be easy. And, you know, it's happening, but, you know, it's a resource, a tremendous resource. Yeah. Anyway, I just had to.
It's wonderful that Scott and all of you are focused on her, the messages she gave, particularly in the Meher Baba journals, or were printed in the Meher Baba journals, because very little attention has been given to. But I think you're right. The time comes for these things. You know, there's a timing with Baba, and then it's meaningful because it's the right time. And I particularly like that Scott has put them into sort of a poetic format, because really speaking, it's like poetry in a sense. You know, one doesn't sort of read a poem like you read a book, you know, or a lecture, or, I mean, you know what I'm saying, or, you know, a discourse.
Mhm.
It's more an experience, and one has to sort of experience it and be open to the experience. Yeah, well, you know, I'm thinking of John Ashbery. Nobody accuses John Ashbery of being comprehensible if you read his poems for trying to figure out what the heck he's saying. But if you don't do that, or Paul Celan, the great poet, Paul Celan, you read it and let your inner intuition experience it, right? And you don't try to understand it. It will speak if you give it a chance. Anyway, so there's a parallel to what these messages are meaning to people now, and that's wonderful that he's encouraging people to experience those things. Yeah.
Well, it's kind of amazing that there was a whole set of these messages entitled Mystical Language. 2 of them were, I think 4 of them were published in the journals, but Adi Kearani had the rest of them in his file. So Scott has gone to the files and taken those out, and those, like, just in a word, one of the things it says that struck me so strongly, it says, God in us is rejoicing his own experience of joy. I just, to hear something like that, and just so, you know, it's very, and also to let go of one's intellectual grip, you know, our English language. And even though Narina her native language was Italian, you know, she wrote them in English. She must have, you know, I just think that's interesting. It's very hard to let go of your language, and it's a universal language worldwide. Yeah. Anyway, it's was time will reveal, but I'm grateful for the help now, I can tell you. Yeah. And one line from that mystical, those different mystical ones, it says, this mystical language in I is the experience totally bold language, the word of God, the experience, not the thought of God, not, you know, just that one line I heard and hearing these read, you know, just so tremendous. You might look into hearing those, Charles, you know. Anyway, I just have to at least chip in a word about it because Baba said it's for the future. And here we sit in the future, you know. Yeah.
Yes, Jeff.
Hey, Baba.
Hey, Baba, Charles. Jay, Baba, everyone. Charles, your love for Baba is always so beyond contagious to my heart, all of our hearts.
Well, thank you.
Really wonderful to see you at the center and hear when you talk with us. The question that comes to my mind and heart, Baba spoke about meditation is not that important during the first 100 years of his advent and leaving the body. And I've been sitting for many years. And I guess my question is, I have no doubt that Baba spoke about quieting the mind, being with reality, being with what is, radically accepting what is in every moment. Well, I guess my two-part question is, what is your take on Baba not encouraging meditation? And what is your take on the way Baba encouraged us to quiet the mind? Which I think is very wonderful and important, because we know what the mind does so much with its chitter chatter, the monkey mind. And I just wonder if you could go into some detail on those two questions.
Well, of course, I have no sort of idea of what Baba really has in mind, but I do feel that in working on Nadine Tolstoy's story, her papers, and we put together a manuscript about her life with Baba, and you know, she was very focused on meditation herself. She came to Baba through her experience of Paramahansa Yogananda, and meditation was a very big part of her life. And so when she came to Baba, you know, actually, Baba gave her various things to meditate on. You know, certain sayings, certain phrases to use in meditation. And so she always had that as her practice. But I mean, I think everything is individual with Baba. So, you know, Pindu, when they would meditate with Baba in the ashram in the early days, which they did quite a bit, Pindu couldn't keep awake. So, but he wanted to obey Baba because Baba, listen, one thing Baba really was strict about, keeping awake in his presence. Keep awake, Baba would say. Very focused. Baba was very, he was very aware if you weren't. I had a little experience of that myself, so I know, you know, even a little bit of drowsiness, Baba saw it immediately. So Pindu couldn't keep awake. And, you know, Pindu didn't read the books. He didn't, you know, he wasn't interested in cosmology. He didn't, you know, he was a worker. He was a worker all the time working. And it just, you know, spiritual practices and so forth were just not his thing, you know, you could say. Anyway, he couldn't keep awake. And so he started to do this to keep himself awake during the meditation with Baba, like this. That's how he got his name, Pindu. And Baba said, oh, pendulum. And so from then on, he was called Pindu. But in the ashram with Baba, you know, as all of you know, in the 30s and all that, there's a lot of meditation. I mean, Baba had to meditate a lot. And so I don't know, encourage means what? I mean, I mean, if one, yeah, so growing up with Baba from the outside, obviously I didn't have that opportunity to be with Baba when they were doing those things. Baba didn't encourage us to meditate. He didn't say don't meditate, but it just wasn't something that I thought about growing up with Baba very much. Until one day, Elizabeth, Auntie Boo, called me into her room and said that she wanted to talk to me, and I wanted to, maybe I precipitated the conversation. I must have, because I went into her room. What I wanted to ask her about was how there's my talking dog, how she knew what Baba wanted her to do every day. And I've told this story, but I'll just say again, she said, well, meditation, she said, is listening. She said, meditation is listening to Baba. She said, prayer is speaking to him. And she said, they're like two sides of one coin. And she said, both are very important in life with Baba. Said, so you see, what I do is I listen. In the morning for a few moments, a short time, I will listen in silence. And then she said, and the day becomes the answer. So then I knew that's very important to listen to Baba. So it's not that practice meditation or not practice, it's, to me, that's life with Baba. Listening to Baba is life with Baba. And of course, stilling the mind is essential so that we can hear what he's saying in the heart. It's like Baba said in the quote I read, if the ears, if you don't shut the ears of your minds, you don't open the ears of your hearts. Now, people can call it whatever they want. No, Baba didn't want to set up, everybody should practice this or practice that. That's what I think he meant. It's not like I'm telling everybody to meditate, like some teachers do. There wasn't Baba. He wasn't like that. He didn't say everybody should do this, everybody should do that. But if you look at everything that Baba did in his lifetime with those around him, they meditated all the time. It was pretty common in those days. And to sit with Baba in silence in the ashram in Nasik and in Meherabad was very common. That was to meditate on. Baba says, now you meditate on me. And they would just sit with him in silence. So to me, it's like breathing with Baba's life. And life with Baba is always finding times to listen and then always finding times to speak to him. And that, if you call it meditation or call it whatever, I think, but that's what it is. To me, that's the warp and woof of life with Baba. I don't know if that speaks to what you're asking, but that's how I feel.
Speaks beautifully to what I was asking, and I've been waiting since 1972 to hear such a perfect answer through you, Baba. Truly, I mean it very much so, Charles. I'm really just
Well, that's quite a wait.
clarified it so beautifully, truly. I mean, wow. I better stop right there. Thank you. Beautiful answer. Thank you.
Shipa. Shilpa.
How are you?
Right.
I really found that, thank you for asking that question, Jeff, but I just had a quick follow-up on that. I think it's beautiful the way you described prayer and meditation that was, shared by Elizabeth. But then I guess my question is, not all of us are successful in silencing the mind because you have a million thoughts going through. And so how do you, sometimes I find that there are, and they do say, right, like sometimes if you have any, sometimes you get answers through meditation, right? Like Baba will, so how does that work when you have a bunch of thoughts racing through and then you might be trying to concentrate back onto Baba's name or however you choose to meditate. So any advice on that?
Well, Jeff is probably the one to give advice. He's the meditator of great years, but I would say for me, the old thing of one follows one's breathing. And I use Baba's name because that helps me to follow my breathing, ba, 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 ba. And thoughts do come. Of course they do. And then I notice that they come. And then, meditation teachers will always say, let them come and then let them go. Baba said much the same thing. Just let them come and notice them. It's like there's something else. They're not you. They're just thoughts. You are not the thoughts. We're so habituated to thinking, well, my thoughts must be me. Well, they're not. They're just thoughts. But of course, that takes practice, takes, doing it regularly and then after a while, it's just natural. It's like you see them, you notice them. They're like these things buzzing around. And then they buzz away, right? If you go back to what you were doing, and that's why it's, for me at least, it's good to have something to do. Breathing and being aware of your breathing, which we're not obviously aware of regular most of the time. We don't notice it, but noticing it is an activity, and it really takes some concentration, and then saying Baba's name, of course, is a joy. I have I cheat a little bit. I mean, maybe it's not cheating. I have these little things. I don't know what you call them. There's a company that makes them. They're two little pods or things, and you turn them on and these sounds come, and it's different each time. I don't know how they do this. It must be programmed to do this, but they're just these beautiful bell-like sounds that come one and the other, and for me that really helps it and you can do, and they last for 3 minutes. So if I'm want to stop in the day just to focus on Baba, it's a very good aid for somebody like me who has a hard time letting go of my thoughts or not letting it all so so that everybody finds some way to sort of help themselves do that, and it's kind of as Jeff I'm sure can say, it's like it's a joy to find ways to listen more and more and to silence the mind more and more. It's just a joy. It's not it shouldn't be a task or an effort. Baba's not saying if you don't do this, of course, do what feels natural, right? I mean, if that feels natural to you, great. If it doesn't, that's fine. But the benefit of it, and that was inherent in what Jeff was asking about, of quieting the mind. Oh my gosh, such a great benefit, because the mind, just won't let us alone. And the more we practice quieting it, the less it bothers us, right? The less it has control over us, right?
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think that really helped.
Good.
But yeah, I'm definitely not there, but I keep trying every day.
Just get
There's my
just
one.
get a dog, Shilpa. The dog
I have
will.
a dog. In
Yes.
fact, you know what? Going back to the dog conversations, I feel like he is the most quiet one in our house. And yeah, I just feel like, man, yes. So
So
thank you just so
I saw
much.
Candy and then Betty. Candy?
A couple of thoughts.
With-
You touched on everything beautifully, Charles. I'll say this very briefly. One thing that's an enormously
Oh.
insightful help for me, which I heard an old man say a few years ago, who's been meditating very long. He said, thoughts never stop. That's the job of the mind. And when I heard John say that, it just took the whole reality of wanting to have that mind really get in that extraordinary quietness that we would see Baba possibly if we were with him or feel him now. The mind never stops thinking. As you said, they're only thoughts. They're just thoughts. Mind churns out thoughts. You mentioned breath, Charles. I breathe in the Baba's love. I breathe in Baba's love when I begin my meditation in the morning. And I breathe out Baba's love in the morning. And I breathe in Baba's love. I breathe out Baba's love. And the other thing I can say is I use a hand mala, a small hand mala, in which I say, Baba, 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 I love you, Baba, Baba, I love you, Baba, 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 Baba. And that hand mala does help. I can put it down a little bit also. And I go back to breathing in Baba's love, breathing out Baba's love, saying his name. And as Esfandiar said, see Baba right in front of you, facing you. I put a photo of Baba in front of me, but one can also close their eyes and literally see Baba right in front of you. He says, I am closer to you than your very own breath. So we are very blessed to have a chance to walk into Baba's lake of love through quiet sitting, meditation, prayer, as you said, both. Thank you. Thank you so much for, thank you.
Thank you. That was beautiful, Joe. Okay, Candy and Betty.
I wanted to say to what Shilpa was saying, and also, I guess Jeff too, well, everybody really. The mind never stops thinking. But Baba gave us meditation and action. So what we have is we have a choice as to what we are thinking about. So Baba said, remember me. So every time our crazy minds are thinking, we have then at that point, I noticed we have a choice. We can think about that, or we can think about Baba. So when we think about, we make a choice, we go, I think I'll drop that and I'll think about Baba instead. And that's meditation in action. We can do that anywhere. And Baba gave us that. That is an incredible gift. It's a gift we could make use of. We don't have to sit cross-legged in meditation. We don't have to do practices. We don't have to try and stop our minds because we can't. But we can think about Baba. And that's how I see it. So that's what I try to do. I try to make that choice. I also have a monkey mind like everybody else, Oh, but I can turn my mind away from it. I can put a match to it, like Baba says. I often say that because Baba often said when the Mandali would come to him with things, sometimes he would help them and say, oh, you must do this and that. But sometimes also he would say, put a match to it. Well, what does that mean? Goodbye, throw it away, burn it up. So sometimes when I think of crazy things, this and that, and just normal things, I go put a match to it. And I turn my attention towards Baba. I think that is, as I said, the gift that Baba gave us that is incredible. And, I'm sure we've all heard the saying, what you think about, you become. So there you have it, think about Baba. You can always do that at any time, anywhere. So that's what I have to say.
Yes,
Exactly.
thank you.
Yeah.
Betty.
This has been, well, this whole day I wanted to remark, I mean, my goodness, it's like we're, I don't know, chipmunks storing up what's the word? Well, anyway, storing up something for such energy for tomorrow, where we will maybe sort of slowly process and reflect. What a day this has been. It started out with sharing quotes, and some of us went to Jamie and Jim's music concert and this wonderful meeting. Wow, it has just been a day. I wasn't expecting that. It's wonderful to think that tomorrow will be our time to be quieter and more reflective. That was one thing, but the other thing I wanted to say was music. I find I can get into the real doldrums, but if I'll just start singing really loud, happy songs, lively songs. I find that that's so helpful to get my energy up again, to get going. So there's something to be said for, and I know Daryl and others of us know I love your music, Daryl. Others here, I know you know that too. So just wanted to comment. Thanks, Charles. This has been great. It's been wonderful.
Thank you, Betty. Marion, and then Michael.
Hi, thank you. I was going to jump off this call at some point, but it's too compelling. I'm very grateful. I live in New York City, so I have my quiet times in my apartment and meditating and whatever, sometimes singing. But when I'm out, it's a challenge because in New York, we walk all over the place. There's a lot of noise and a lot of distractions. There's a lot of friendly dogs, but it's a lot of dogs that jump all over us too. And so I have my tools, I call it my toolbox, and that work for me. So I'm sharing it, not telling anybody else what to do. And that's one of my bouncy balls is when I'm bouncing a ball, my mind has to stay and say Baba's name with it. I can't do anything else, got to pay attention. And the other is my yo-yo. I always recommend a yo-yo, is when I'm throwing my yo-yo, I cannot, and I say Baba's name as it goes in and out, then that keeps me on course and not all distracted by everything in New York that can be so distracting. So that's a sharing. And I'm end this sharing with gratitude. That's the foundation of my life. And being with you today is just makes my day. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Marianne. Isn't it wonderful how people find these tremendously helpful things in their lives to keep them focused? That's wonderful. I love it. Never have thought of the yo-yo. That's a good one. I like that.
Yeah, there's instructions on YouTube. Everything's on YouTube, so you can get instructions.
Yeah.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Michael, and then Wendy. Michael. Hello, Michael. You have to unmute yourself.
Okay.
All right. Hello, Charles. Hello, everyone.
Oh, different Michael. All right.
Different Michael. Okay, we'll get back to you.
That's all right. No problem.
Is that all right? Is it my time?
Yes, go.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
So a memory just came to me as people were talking, and I went back to an evening with Adi Keirani. And I believe it was 79, his last trip. That was his last trip here, wasn't it? 79?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. And for a few days, I was living upstate New York in those days. Yeah. And for a few days, Adi was in the Albany area. And one night, a few of us, after talks, were sitting around a fire in somebody's backyard. It was midnight. You know, it was a long, long, full day. I taped this, actually. He allowed this to be taped, you know. And he was telling stories. I'm wondering, Bobby, if you were there. I don't know. But telling stories, and it was a summer evening, and you could hear the crickets, and you could hear the fire crackling. And then at one point, Adi takes in a deep breath, and he goes, ah, a deepest sigh. And he says, oh, I miss him. And then it was silent still. None of us dared say a word. Maybe there were 6 or 7 of us around. And then after a long pause, he looks at us and he says, this is the real meditation. Just sitting around, thinking of him, remembering him, asking about him, wondering about how it is. This is the meditation that really matters. Yeah. I just flashed on that as some of you were talking here on the screen.
Thank you, Michael. That's beautiful.
And the thing I want to add to that, that piece, I mean, nothing could really go beyond just what he said. But one of the things that got communicated to me in that moment, beyond the utter naturalness of this giant of God, was a kind of unspoken permission to find our own way. And that he didn't get into specifics, but that deep feeling sense of just trying to clear a space, as we see in psychology, clearing a space so that it could be filled up with what's going to come in or what we could assert. But the most important thing is that it has to be our own way, in our own moment. That was just utterly beautiful. And I've carried that insight or feeling with me ever since.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Wendy, and then we'll go back to Michael number 2. Yes, Wendy. You have to unmute. Wendy, could you unmute? There you go.
Okay, me and the mute button. I don't know what that is. Anyway, this is this is a doggy story. I shared it earlier because she's not a puppy anymore, but she's high energy. She's a golden or a labradoodle, sorry. Anyway, long and the short, because of COVID, she's been with us 24/7. Like, she's never away from us. But then we went into a heat wave here up in Canada. And of course, you can't take her because it's too hot in the car because you can't leave her there. So anyway, one of the things we're doing is when we leave the house or when it's time for bed, we say Jai Baba. She doesn't howl at the door now as we're leaving. And at night, she just knows that's the time to go to her grave. So anyway, it's just a doggy story, but I just thought it was kind of cute to share. Anyway, thank you.
That is cute.
Thank you.
So Michael Shepard, did you want to say something earlier? And
I will. I don't know that I had my hand raised. I might have been just resting my head on my hand or something. but I will. And first, just before I forget, to Michael Siegel, I haven't seen Michael Siegel. I haven't seen you in so many years. It was really great. I remember being at Darwin's meeting when I was very new with Baba. And Michael looked in my eyes and said, "Yep, you've got the look." So I looked in my eyes and said, "Yeah, you got it." I knew what he meant because I did. I was in the honeymoon phase. But anyway, Charles, so great to see you and hear you again. I think last year I attended one of your talks on Zoom. And we've been Zoom. I mean, I think everybody's just been Zooming for a few years now. And you know, my wife Judy is often around and listens to all these. She refers to herself as Zoom averse, so she doesn't get on screen, you know. But it's quite a tool, and we would not have been able to share nearly as much as we have. And I don't expect this will go away, even though we've come back to live meetings. It's just you can't have the access that you can with this tool, and it's a tool of the times that we live in. So I think it's a good thing, a very good thing, even though the same tool of being online also produces other kinds of problems, but sharing does not. Sharing is generally only a good thing. So, but beautiful to see you and hear you again, Charles, and it's great since we don't get together in person that much anymore.
No, that's why this is as you say, such a special thing.
Yeah,
I'm so grateful to Angela, I think, for envisioning this possibility and turning it into something that brings people from really all over the world together. And we wouldn't, how would we see each other like this, you know? So yes, meetings are great in person, that's wonderful, but I mean, I've seen people through Zoom that I haven't seen in years and years, like you said about Michael. So yes, it's a blessing. It's a real blessing, you know. It's and Angela and Ruthie and others who make it happen. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, Baba.
Hey, Baba. Well, this has been wonderful. I've really enjoyed. Thank you for those of you who've been sharing you know, this last part. It's so sweet to hear from you and your experiences and your deep commitment to, as Erich would say, your determination to be his. It's just so inspiring. And it's also such a wonderful reminder to me, hearing everybody and the ideas they have, the experiences, whether it's through Norina's messages or through meditation in one's life or through a yo-yo or whatever it is, or through the dog and cat that we have in our lives, whatever it is, isn't it, don't you agree that it says so much about Baba, how different we all are and how much the same?
Yeah.
There's no other, I can't even imagine a community as deeply connected in the heart and yet as different in how one lives and practices and thinks about Baba. You know, I mean, we learn from one another, but it's everything in our lives is between the individual and Baba, and he is able to be the direct beloved for each and every one in the way that is meaningful to that person. You know, there's no one's shaking their head and saying, oh no, if you're not doing that, then you're not loving him. No one is doing that. Why? Because Baba gave us the example that to love him is very much between each person and Baba, how you do it, how you try to do it. So that's what I'm so touched about this gathering today, is a reminder to me of how, as Francis would always say, what a mighty beloved is our beloved. And how, you know, the world is what it is, and it changes, and we have to do our best. We have to do our part. I believe that if we so inclined or moved to help others, and of course Baba says we should make others happy, even at the cost of our happiness. That's what he asks us to do if we love him. So it is about engagement, it is about being in the world, but it's also at the same time true that for the lover of the beloved, it's all zero, all that's happening. And all of you remind me of that. How only thing that matters is remembering him. It's remembering him. So thank you all. Yeah. And thank you again, Ruthie.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba, everybody.
Maybe we could have a moment of silence together.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
Okay.
Jai Baba, everyone. Have a wonderful Silence Day with Baba. Yeah.
You too, Charles.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charles.
Thank you, Charles.
Jai
Baba. Jai Baba.
Love
Thank you,
everyone.
Charles.
Lots
Thank
of
you,
love.
Ruth. Thank you, Ruth and Charles and everyone.
Jai Baba.
Thank you. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Thank you, Baba. Wonderful time.
Christopher too. Have a good day tomorrow, both of you.
Happy Silence Day, everybody.
Thank you, Jai Baba.
Love to all.